c'est Portugal. In Arabic, orange juice is from Portugal. But in Russian, apple savoy sok. I don't remember the exact thing, but in Russian, it's from China. And I meet a lot of people who they're learning languages and they talk about what's useful, utility. And yes, if you're learning a language for business or going to live in a country, you learn the language of that country. But I think a lot, too much, has gone into utility. Not just for languages, but for architecture. I mean, our parliaments across the world are looking more like 1990s shopping malls, rather than something that's meant to aspire us to triumph, glory and greatness. It's materialism, but it's materialism both left and right, because in this, you'll see how this gets into languages, but the left wants to reshape material things for equality, and the right wants to reshape material things for freedom. One chases GDP, the other chases a John Lennon utopia. Both of them are nuts. And language has been affected. How we learn it, how we look at it has been affected. And in this video, I want to show you, I'm Benjamin, how we're ignoring the whole heap of humanity that led to us having languages in the first place, I believe. The spiritual element of it, the identity and the sense of belonging, meaning. Each language has meaning in different words. I had a friend at university who he was learning Welsh and he couldn't understand why in some cases English had 3 words for something and Welsh had 2 to explain the same thing, or 4 and 3 or 3 and 5, etc. And the English language, like Mandarin, Chinese, it simply has box slots. And every little idea goes into one box. It's incredibly efficient for administering an empire, or running a legal system, or creating a merchant class. It's incredibly efficient for that. But it's remarkably bad at creating a priesthood. It's uniquely awful at creating subtlety. Except in the case, English found a way around that. It just kept making up more and more words for each little category. Home and house, for example. But other languages do that too. I'll get to that in a minute. But other languages, like Welsh and Celtic languages, have fewer words for verbs, action words. They can use that across multiple things, like gwneud is make and do. It has some other uses as well. English doesn't do that, it has make and do. English has one word for to know, but in Welsh, knowing a person or a place is not the same thing as knowing a fact, and you can't mix the two, otherwise the sentence won't make sense. And so language is not just learning vocabulary, it's learning meaning. Because what you think is a hearth, a fireplace, that may just be where fire is for you. But in Romanian, cămin, it means the home as well. The home itself. Getting back to home, Welsh has T for house, cartre for home, and adre, to home or at home. Where are you? Adre. And Romanian has this as well, actually. Casa, you might be able to guess what that means if you speak Spanish. House. But it is a casa, at home. One of you who has been with the channel for a while now as a supporter, Mihaile8808, I think that's your username. You suggested that a casa to me in Romanian, so thank you very much. And cămin, as I said. And this hearth idea, that's across the Latin languages, Romance languages. So in French, le foyer. In Spanish, I believe it's el hogar. And in Italian, il focolare. They're all masculine. That's interesting. But this concept of home. So English has house, home, and at home. Dutch does something similar. It has huis, or Dutch vowels are crazy, but it has thuis, Thuis, and then Thuis again for atom. So it combines te, to mean at home and home. The Germanic languages generally have a lot of this home element. I'll put it on the screen now because I don't know how to pronounce Norwegian quite properly. Hus, hjem, hjemme. Compare that to Romanian and Welsh there. So you can see different languages have different ways to express this basic concept. Greek and Hebrew, they don't have a separate word for house and home. Russian doesn't really either. You can say dom or doma in some cases, but it's really the same word. And it changes to the A depending on where you put it in the sentence. That's how Russian gets away with it. With that in mind, a sense of home, a sense of belonging, meaning, that languages are deeper than just being able to achieve economic units of GDP simply by learning the language. Let's look at words in different languages they give you a sense of belonging merely by understanding what they are. So, Hindi, first of all, Vatan. I think this word comes from Persian or maybe Arabic. A sense of national pride, but not wider India sense, like the region that you're from, the homeland. Because India itself is like several dozen homelands, really. It's massive. It's a subcontinent, and I'm talking about all of India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan. Now, I know, don't get angry at me in the comments, no death threats, please, but this word really sums up that there are different ecosystems within this landmass. So where I'm from, the Bayou country, I have a Vatan. I have a pride of being born on the Bayou. I like it. It's a pride that gives you strength. Vatan really captures a connection to your roots, the land of your birth. Next one. Greek, nostos. This is related to nostalgia, but this is not sad. You ever heard of like Jason and the Argonauts, and then the other one about Troy and the Odyssey, all of these epics, Greek epics. Nostos is when you go off on a journey. Think of like the hobbits and they come back and they're the heroes in triumphant joy. It's that sense when you're a hero coming back home. The sense that if you want to be accomplished as a man, go off on a journey and come back with the spoils of war to your people. I like that. We need a bit more of that kind of masculine energy in our life today. And that specific kind is just so Greek. If you've ever read the classical Greek stuff. Nostos. Next. Gyeohyang. I'm not pretending I'm pronouncing these right, any of them. I'm just trying my best. I only speak 3 languages. I can understand about 5 or 6, but I don't speak any Oriental languages. This one is that hometown that you have, kind of a wholesome hometown, that if you're a businessman and you go off to the city and you need strength, well, find your Gyeohyang, your hometown that rejuvenates you and rebuilds you as a person. It seems to suggest to me that Korea is full of these beautiful towns. That's what it seems to. And just from this one word, maybe Korea is worth visiting. I'm sure it's worth visiting regardless. But it shows a sense of pride in their people about their local areas. It's not so much the ancestral sense, but there is a tink of that. but it's more of to regather yourself, center yourself, that regardless of what's going on in the big bad city, there are more meaningful things in life. Himat. You can tell that there's a bit of the word home in that, and the at ending, kind of essence of. This is unique to Germany because, well, Austria, German-speaking lands, because it's a love of home, history, and land fused together to create a sense of oneness. Now, I'm sure if I were drinking in a beer hall in Bavaria, and there were the Traustia, that's Welsh for the wooden beams above, and they were 400 years old, 500 years old, and my family had been in that land for a while. I did have family in that part of the world a long time ago. If they'd stayed there, and through the Holy Roman Empire, I mean, have you ever seen the maps of this thing? It's like thousands of little principalities. You'd have a sense of loyalty to your little area. And if you're drinking in that beer hall with those ancient beams above you, and maybe heraldic symbols of what was, and you can say, yes, my family has been here that long, I sense that would give you a feeling of oneness. And you would know more or less the boundaries of that land according to your German dialect, because German is, I mean, it's questionable. Is it one language? I mean, and I like this. It's very German, as you would expect, because it interweaves that Holy Roman Empire sense of massive disunity. But because of that, you find a unity in yourself. Scots Gaelic, Kianalas. This is a longing, a calling back to the shores of your own ancestry, the stones of your people, the rocky shores, the islands. There are quite a few islands in Scotland, especially in the regions where Scots Gaelic is spoken. And it's one of those words that really echoes of the ecosystem, the land itself, that the land itself over generations gave this word to the people. It is a multi-generational longing. It can pass through generations. I miss you, Grandpa. I went up to Scotland. Next. And speaking of generations, there's an Irish word in a related language, Irish. Duchas, which is, I'm not sure if they have this in Scots Gaelic. I assume they probably do, just because of how similar the languages are, or something like it. But Duchas is the soil that your ancestors are buried in, and your innate bond to that. For instance, I went down to Cornwall, and there's a cemetery there with several people with my same name. And that feeling, that's my blood, that duchas, and there are many old cemeteries in Ireland, not even to count all those standing stones, and most of those are graves. So I can understand why the landscape itself would have created such a word. Forgive me if I butcher the pronunciation of this word. Saudade. I know the endings of words kind of soften in Portuguese, so forgive me. This word is beautiful, and I had to think really hard which one of these that I'm going to say to you in this video is my favorite. I don't think it's saudade, but this is magnificent. This word is magnificent. It's so have you how can I put this? So imagine you spend years with someone and you have a room full of their belongings, full of memories that you shared together. And then you lose that person. And then you walk into that room a few days later, perhaps. Maybe it's years later, it doesn't matter. And that's the first time you've been in that room without that person. And you're surrounded by their belongings. And you love them. Some have described this as the presence of absence. Another one that I've heard people describe it as is, well, there are many abandoned villages in the north and east of Portugal. And imagine going back to your home childhood village. And it was full of people when you left the big city as a young boy or girl. And then you go back, and everything's the same shape, but there's nothing left of the old people. And you can walk down those alleyways and feel them still. That's saudade. Oh, I wanted to mention the landscape of Portugal because it's Iberian, so it's passionate. But especially that northern bit of Portugal, it's wet. Or often wet. And it's kind of a mixture of Celtic melancholy with Iberian passion. I like that. Japanese for risotto. This is another one related to a village. Suppose you're a businessman in the city, a bit like Korean. But this is a bit different because it's the old village. It doesn't even imply that you grew up there. It just implies that you have roots there and you go back there to find your anchor, your spiritual self, your connection with your ancestors, a rooting in the soil. Even if you didn't grow up there, it still has you in it. It's kind of haunting because it's multi-generational. I like it. This is a Norwegian word and I find this very difficult to pronounce. Friluftsliv. It literally means free air life, open air living. And it's so Scandinavian. I've got a bit of Swedish in me and I can kind of, yeah, I get this. I really get this. It's a cultural and mental well-being from being in nature, that you have an inborn need to be in the wild in order to feel that you're living your life properly. You can just look at the Norwegian landscape and understand why this word is a thing. Next. Tosca. This is so Russian. It is a wistful anguish over something that you're not sure of what it even is. Maybe a place, sometimes a person, that has been lost, but you're not sure what exactly has been lost. And it also has a political kind of, not a political meaning, but the suggestion that you're longing for a time in which the politics were different. And I'm wondering if this wasn't born just after the Russian Revolution, but became more widespread, because what the communists did is they altered the truth of what actually happened before and denied people knowledge of their own history. If people wanted what came before, they didn't even know what came before, really. You see what I'm saying? So Tosca is like, you want a time and place that existed, but you don't know what that was because you have no knowledge of that time and place. It was just here, and you don't know how it changed. Something cataclysmic happened, and you feel anguish and darkness because of it. And I think this is my favorite. It's succinct, sisu. The root of that word is actually intestines, gut. And it's the harshness of the winter, the brutality of that barren, horrific landscape, what it does to you, and you're dying and you want to survive the brutality of this cold and windswept, salty wetness. But in that, there's a life force. It just comes out of your gut, the will to survive, determination. That feeling that you're going to overcome this ferocity of cold and dark winter, that is sisu. I like it, given that it's rained every single day this year so far in Wales, and it's February. I need some sisu, so I liked this word when I found it. Let's get to Welsh and Hebrew. That's really why I made this video. That's what spurred me to make it. Welsh is hiraeth and Hebrew has aliyah. And they both really say a lot about how these two peoples, Welsh and Jews, view themselves. And so let's start with hiraeth. The etymology of this word, where does it come from? Hir means long, and aeth is an inspecific abstract ending. It's not like ing, longing, long and then verb, the verbal ending. No, in Indo-European languages, masculine and feminine arose out of trying to categorize objects and ideas according to abstract and concrete, basically, and specific and inspecific. The category that became the inspecific and abstract became feminine, because you never know what a woman's thinking. She can even tell you exactly what she's saying or thinking, and then 2 minutes later, she will be thinking something else that will destroy you. I have a few sisters, and so this aeth ending, words like athroniaeth, philosophy, cerddoriaeth, music, gwleidyddiaeth, politics. You see what I'm saying? These are abstract concepts. And so the abstract, unknown nature of being long in yourself. It's not like longing, is it? Longing it's physical, it's clear about what it's going toward. Hiraeth is less specific. There's a vagueness because longing is more of a specific thing in a specific time window. So in Welsh, time doesn't exist like English. Yes, it's Indo-European, so it's not like certain African languages in which time doesn't really exist. That's a thing. I'm not being anti-African. There are literally African languages where time is just whatever you want it to be. Hiraeth is like, okay, if you ask 10 different Welsh speakers, what is hiraeth, you will get 10 different answers. So if I can compress more or less the common thread through what everybody would say, it's usually of a place, not always, sometimes it's a person or a thing, but usually a place in a specific time, but the place can still be there, but because the time has moved on, it's not the same place. So time determines place. So if you go back to your old village and knock on a door and someone answers and they're not speaking Welsh, which happens, and you grew up in an environment that was all Welsh speaking, you're going to have hiraeth for the place that existed in that time. Because if everyone there speaks English now, it's not the same place. It's not the same essence. And wanting that, that's hiraeth, which is a common story in Welsh history. Aliyah has several different meanings. Mostly it's when Jews immigrate back to Israel, it's ascending, because Jerusalem is up in the mountains. You're ascending, you are being lifted up toward Jerusalem. There's a holiness there, there's a sacredness. In a synagogue where you are called up on the bima, the platform, to read the Torah, you are given an aliyah. You are called up toward God. And the waves of migration, I think there's been 5 aliyot, the plural, of mass migration back to Israel. Each one of those is called an aliyah, of a great wave of people going up, ascending towards God. Both of these concepts in Welsh and Hebrew are feminine. I wonder if there's something there in the abstract nature of it. There's a going up towards your homeland. In Welsh, there's a sense of a specific place and time. That's a very different way of looking at your land. So I hope by making this video, you can see that there's more to utility in language. We need belonging, we need meaning, we need identity. And so much of the culture has been focused on utility. Both sides of politics in the 20th century, thankfully we're moving out of this materialist, scientific way of looking at the world, and we can again approach the world with a sense of awe, wonder, divine presence, tribal connection, identity, that sense of the hometown giving you roots, like in Japan and Korea. The Russian Revolution was not necessarily a good thing. We've even created words to describe our longing for whatever happened before, which we've denied ourselves, so we don't know what happened before these revolutions. The globalisation that's sapped the life out of Portuguese and Spanish towns. And you go back and where is the presence that's Sodaude? The wanting to cling to your ancestral soils and rocks. That's all over the Celtic languages. The sense of home, echoing the fragmentation of their Holy Roman Empire before all this modernity nonsense. The wanting to go back to the fjords. It's just etched on language after language. Wanting to learn these things because they're useful is... yes, it's a thing, but it's not going to make us any more human. In fact, it might make us less human. And I hope, whatever language you're learning, I hope you become more human and less intertwined into the world of GDP and redistributional economics and material concerns. Diolch yn fawr iawn am wylio. Thank you very much for watching. We will see you next time.